So welcome to Unlayered, the show where we explore next-gen blockchains. I'm your host, Sol, alongside my partner in crime, Dave. And today we have a nice chat with Kel. We had Kel on this summer after he put out an amazing report on Solana, and one that I always show to people when they're trying to learn more about not just the ecosystem, but what's on the horizon. I think at the time when you put it out, Kel, Solana wasn't trading at the highest, but nowadays it's gone up a lot. And certainly the interest has been really high. And it was fun catching up with you at Breakpoint, getting some of your hot takes. And I love the energy, and I wanted to encapsulate some of that energy into a podcast episode, share it with our fans and listeners who are trying to stay on top of the ecosystem. So, Kel, it's awesome to have you back here. What's new? What's on your mind? We've been seeing a lot of activity on Twitter, or X rather, these days. But how are things?
Things are doing pretty well, man. I think Breakpoint was a lot of activity, a lot of teams, a lot of people building a lot of different things, random things in different directions, and
Right.
can almost be kind of overwhelming, but that's a good thing, right? You rather be overwhelmed than underwhelmed. So yeah, a lot of good energy, met a lot of good people, and of course, token price goes up, tech gets the price goes up
Exactly.
200%.
It's directly correlated.
Exactly.
It is not the case that the fundamentals are exactly the same as they were a year ago, and nothing really functionally changed about the technology, but actually the tech scales with the price. And so we're seeing that play out in real time with all the interest. Is that the right way to think about this?
I think from a narrative perspective, it definitely is. It's like,
right.
The whole idea that price leads narrative is one that I've really tried to internalize over my time being in crypto the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
In terms of you might know something is super as true can be, maybe Solana tech good, or at least Solana tech promising. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But saying that a year ago when price is $8, saying that 6 months ago price is $20 or $15 or whatever the case may be, most people are just not willing to accept the possibility that could be true. And then the price goes up, all of a sudden people are now like, oh, I'm feeling a different type of way about this certain kind of thing. And so I think the really important takeaway for me as a researcher is that oftentimes, you want other people, especially other people you think are smart people, to you almost looking for that confirmation bias, that person's smart, they agree with me, therefore I'm not an idiot. But oftentimes if that person is starting from an opposing bias, then they're just not going to agree with you no matter what until the numbers start going up. And then all of a sudden it's like, yo, bro, I got this Solana shitcoin that's 1 mil market cap, best thing since sliced bread. So
I think there's just so many people that are really well respected in the industry that have been caught offside on this trade. Because I feel like it's probably over 95% of the crypto community was not in Sol before this run up. And I think a lot of that is people during the bear market looking at where the puck was, which was Ethereum. That's where sort of all the noise was, all the TVL remained. And anyone who actually had a really good look at what was happening under the hood with Solana could see that when volume returns, when users return, it's going to explode because it can just handle those volumes so much better. Is that how you see it?
I would actually take it a step further and say that even the majority of Solana enjoyers, if you will, I'd say even the majority of those people are offsides, in the sense where a lot of people I spoke with at Breakpoint seemed to, almost want prices to go down, or maybe expected to, the trend of conference leads to a dump and I can buy more and I'll buy more 20, or, and then once it started going up, it's like, oh, I'd love to buy some more at 30, blah, blah, blah. And, now it's at 55 or whatever it's at today. So I would even argue that a lot of the people, that was one of my biggest takeaways being at Breakpoint, was these are probably the most bullish people on Solana on planet Earth that have ever lived are here right now. And even they haven't bought as much
Right.
as they might want to. So in terms of the community at large, like there's,
Everyone's
serious offsides infractions. Yeah.
So let's talk about this because you're at Messari. You talk to a lot of people, some Sol fanboys, some not. And I think you guys have some great insights into this. I think I've actually seen some tweets and reports from some of your colleagues about this. But what's different about what's happening in crypto, and it's not just Sol, a lot of coins are running up these days. Even AVAX is up like 100% or something in the last 30 days. What I'm hearing, though, is that this is an institution-driven phenomenon, which is unlike a lot of bull runs. But it seemingly retail is not really leading this charge. What are you hearing on your side from your people at Messari, or just even yourself? Like, what are you observing? The inflows data seems to suggest this is pretty institutional driven, and now the ETF news that might drop this week might make that even more of the case. But how are you thinking about this? I guess the early innings of a bull run from your perspective.
I, I don't really know who's buying and who's really driving it. Of course, there's like huge spot volumes on like Coinbase, so like that maybe gives some indication that maybe some institutions, trying to buy into, the on the other side you have like Galaxy selling like large amounts of Solana, or at least allegedly so.
The yeah, or sorry, the FTX.
But the FTX related sales. But from my perspective, like you really have a few different classes of retail in general. And I think the way that the market plays out is at least as far as I see it, is you have like the people who just didn't die and for whatever reason decided to stay in crypto. Like that's effectively your smart retail. It might not even be smart, but they're going to be the people who buy first because they just happen to, they stayed, like if you saw the FTX collapse and all this stuff and you decided like, yeah, I'm going to just like keep being in this industry, you're naturally going to be, or at least your probability of being the first buyers in the cycle, the people buying Sol 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, etc. It just goes way up just by definition.
Right.
And then the way that I've seen it play out, at least this is only my second cycle, so I can only really reference from experience the last cycle, is you have the sort of opportunistic institutions, if you will. And so the last time it was people like, Druckenmiller and these other kind of hedge fund types that were publicly getting super bullish on like Bitcoin and stuff like that at like 10K in the last cycle. And then that's what kind of, to quote Soros, that's what leads into this reflexivity of like, all right, well, this super smart hedge fund guy said I should buy. So then like the second smartest one does it, third smartest, and kind of catalyzes into this bigger thing. What I'm a bit more skeptical on is like, you talk about some of these like bigger institutions or like less hedge fundy type of players, if you will, like how much they're getting involved. So for example, we saw like Visa talk about using like settlement on Solana and stuff, but I don't know if that necessarily correlates to Visa-esque institutions or pensions or people loading up for ETF and all of this stuff. Like I don't know how much that is material, but this is all just speculation.
Sure. I've seen that though, where institutional demand was driven by like, oh, Visa might use Solana as a scalable payments framework, therefore we should ape in. I'm saying it more from the perspective of like, I think the Grayscale Solana trust is at an 869% premium as of today, like just fresh news. Which seems to suggest that like it's positioning, or that ecosystem Solana is being positioned is almost like the thing after ETH, the number 3 blue chip, so to speak, thing to add to your basket of crypto exposure if you're a big fund. That feels to me like a great tailwind potentially for this whole ecosystem. It's a trend worth monitoring, I think.
Do we think there's a chance of a Sol ETF being approved as well this next cycle?
Yeah. If I knew anything beyond just like baseless speculation in my head, I would tell you, but I got nothing there, and quite frankly, I don't even know how much it really matters in terms of like. I think people kind of over-index on the ETF because they just kind of need like hopium flows of like capital and stuff. Whereas I feel like for Solana and maybe even for other ecosystems as well, you can just kind of stand on legitimate ground of like, hey, we have this ecosystem of these teams that are like building this stuff, and like that will just like be valuable or not, regardless of whether or not like, you know, ETF passive investors like basically bail us out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. So just turning back to Breakpoint, I feel like probably some of the biggest announcements, there were quite a few, and yeah, it'd be really great to go into those. But the airdrops from Pith and from Jupiter, how do you see that unraveling? Do you think that's going to be a big boon for the ecosystem?
Yeah, so Messari has a great report out they put out a while ago called like the wealth effect or something along those lines. And the synopsis of this is that typically when these like, big airdrop campaigns come in, there's a lagging effect that shows like pretty decent user growth. And so that's roughly what I expect here in terms of anytime people see like, you know, big new money, it tends to hoard eyes and hoard attention. And I think that was my working thesis even before we saw Breakpoint, which already showed like that already catalyzed a huge attention flow like towards Solana. And so depending on the size of these airdrops and like what percentage of tokens go out and when teams launch and how uh like in how close of a succession different token launches are, you could definitely see a big effect where like number one, the people who've been using Solana the most over the past 2 years, like just get a huge inflow of capital. And then, you know, of course, some of those people might just sell it, you know, hold USDC, be done with it. But this being crypto, there's a decent probability some, you know, percentage of those people either sell it and use it to buy something else or, you know, use it to buy Sol and stake and, you know, deposit into lending protocol or whatever. And so that can have downstream implications on like TVL increase, you know, even though we've, and I think rightfully so, like somewhat discredited TVL as a metric. Ultimately, like more is probably better than less, even if it's not as important as some people have like made it out to be. And so, in summary, I feel like it's decently likely that with those airdrops and with other teams, like in the midst of points programs and stuff like that, it's probably likely that we see like on-chain activity up, DEX volumes up, TVL up, speculation up, et cetera, et cetera.
I think it's great that the Pith airdrop, I think they said that it will be wallets across 35 different blockchains, and it will be an SPL token. So you're going to be bringing in a huge influx of people from outside of the Solana ecosystem, which I think is great because I genuinely think one of the key marketing tools that Solana has is just getting people on and using it, using the wallets, using the DEXs, and just seeing how sort of buttery smooth it is, how cheap it is. Yes, I'm really excited about that. And I think the other thing is that the airdrops we've seen recently, Celestia and Arbitrum, both during a bear market, both just absolutely killed the chain. You couldn't do anything. Fees were spiking. It was a pretty horrible experience. And I, for one, wasn't keen to stay around those ecosystems once I received those airdrops. So I'm hoping that we can finally see some big airdrops happening in crypto, which don't cripple the chain.
What about here's the thing about this. influx of interest into Solana and Solana adjacent projects, it feels to me like we're not even ready for this action. I mean, none of these sort of projects we're talking about, whether it's Jupiter, Pit, Margin, even Tensor has a program, and you're staking your Tensorians. Like none of the tokens are out yet, so it's just like all this interest is now flowing at these really random long tail Solana coins, and it's unclear to me if that's a good thing. If people start getting burned on freshly dropped meme coins on Solana, especially because the tooling to demystify all this, it's not quite as robust as it is for ERC20s. I mean, there's literally like barely one even Telegram bot that can allow you to trade this stuff, and it doesn't have like, it's not the most feature rich compared to the ones on ETH. There's like one site that lets you check if it's a rug, and yet the most active coins, if you go on things like Bird Eye, you're seeing they're basically all meme coins because there's nowhere else for this money to go. I think Bonk is probably an okay bet if you want to play that game, just because it's been around for a long time. But man, it's a little scary to see what might happen here. I mean, how do you feel about the timing of all this?
I do think there is a sort of optimal timing window where teams that, like, let's say a team was thinking of launching a token like a year from now, let's say.
Yeah.
Kind of want to maybe consider that the attention, as we were talking about people being offsides, both like price wise, but even just like narrative wise. I'm sure like that narrative is accelerated faster than a lot of people might have thought. And so you definitely want to take advantage of that, at least from my perspective. So it wouldn't surprise me to see a lot more teams like consider. I mean, I don't really know when teams are going to drop tokens or if teams are going to drop tokens, but wouldn't surprise me to see them try and take advantage of, like what the rapid increase in attention we've seen. And then in terms of like the shitcoining and like all of that stuff, I mean, like the way I see it is, yeah, like people will definitely get burned and like that'll be super tough. But I'd rather have activity than no activity. And at the very least, it shows that there's some desire to be doing something, where a big critique for literally years was like, oh, what do you do on Sol? You go, you swap into Sol, you stake your Sol, lend your Sol. And it's like, I mean,
in fairness, that criticism is still it's somewhat accurate. Like the fact that there's nothing to do is the reason why these meme coins are getting so much attention versus other ecosystems. It's changing. I think there is a decent amount of things to do. I just think there was always a bit of truth to that criticism. Hopefully that'll shift a little bit sooner rather than later. But even like if you just hop on, CoinGecko or something and just look at the top tokens on Solana, like I'm going down this list. You have to get down pretty far to find anything like kind of new that's also like monogamous to Solana, so to speak. For instance, like Rollbit is one of the top ones here, and that's it's not just that. I mean, they're kind of moving away from Solana. Render is probably like the biggest one. We had them on. Graph, Chainlink, like those are multi-chain, and then it's just like Tether, USDC. You got Frax, like Step In, and that's that's a throwback. Marinade, Helium, Audius, like so I kind of see like remember in DeFi summer with ETH, like these things had tokens, like you could just allocate into them, and they were for better for worse, legitimate projects, new projects, exciting things. So it feels to me like it's just we're in this weird positioning now, and hopefully like we don't kind of miss this window. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think there is now a huge sense of urgency for these airdrops to happen, for people to get that capital, and then ideally start bringing new people into Solana.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a result of the points meta that's been going on as well throughout this bear market, and hopefully it just means that they've been biding their time, and then they can finally launch these things once the market starts going upwards. So hopefully it is going to work, and I hope it's not they're just really enjoying the fact that all of their TVL continues to increase and they haven't even had to release a token yet. I hope that they don't sort of get greedy, if you like, on that front and just see how long that they can stretch it out for. But yeah, we shall see.
For what it's worth, if it just on that point, if it was me, like that's probably exactly what I would do. Where like there's got to be some optimal function where like you can think of it like, all right, if I wait too long, like TVL will flee, people lose interest, et cetera, et cetera. So like there's some maximization point that like might not be actually knowable, but if I were to guess, like that's what all of these teams are trying to hit, right? Like how long can I hold out? Like MetaMask is a great example of this. Right? People have been like WEN token for like 3 years or whatever, and it's just like it's never coming, you know, like it's just not a thing. But they're still able to milk absurd fees and on like the in the MetaMask swaps and all of this stuff
for sure
as a result. So
counterpoint would be like Friendtech. Their window ended up being a lot smaller than I think people thought it would be. At this point, functionally dead. Do people even care about the points there anymore? I don't know. A lot of people sold their keys, and that meta feels like it had like a 3-month window basically. It's not a 1-to-1 comparison. It's not an L1, right? But it's a narrative, it's socialify. But certainly, like there is risk in waiting, especially if other opportunity costs and other things get your attention. And certainly Solana doesn't have a monopoly on high throughput chains. I think every new chain kind of introduces parallelization. Aptos, I know it's down because they a bunch of things unlocked, but they have an integration with a pretty popular app in India. So like that's just to say, let's capitalize on the window. Let's not wait.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I don't think the 3-year wait time, it might be unique to MetaMask and their dominance in the wallet space. Or it's like you kind of have to use this regardless of whether or not you want to farm the airdrop. So yeah.
What about so I mean obviously we were both at Breakpoint. What stood out to you in terms of maybe subsector narrative thing to get excited about? Let's bust some myths. What's exciting? What's maybe feels a little overheated? Let's go with that.
I just feel like, when I want to look at the health of a given ecosystem, I want to look at like the short, medium, long-term prospects. Is like, to your point about like a Friendtech, for example, short term was super hot, but there are these really big questions about like how sustainable is the bonding curve mechanism? How sustainable are the 10% fees? And then we've now seen that play out in like the medium term where like now platform activity is super low. And even when you go in these chats, it's just people saying like, hey, this is me chatting, like to try and like game the point system. And so just like, kind of, I mean, I think it's too early to say it's fully like fallen apart, but the activity is definitely fallen down a lot, both in terms of the numbers that you see as well as like anecdotally.
I kind of feel like Stars Arena might have marked the top of the
it's because Gunn put out that tweet where it's like, oh, they only lost 3 million guys, and then people realize if the guy that's running an entire layer 1 is saying a grift is okay, maybe this whole space isn't it.
Yeah, maybe zero is eminent. This is the bull trap right here.
Oh god.
But yeah, so I think like when it comes to Solana, we've kind of talked about some of the short to medium term catalysts in terms of the like token airdrops, and that incentivizes activity, and these are like, it's also the most legitimate Solana projects, like Jupiter and stuff like that. Yeah. So like that, should hopefully be good. And then, so like on the medium term, one thing that I thought was just really promising was, again, the diversity of teams that I saw, where like you have new players in the exchange space, you have a wide range of players in the deep-in space, you have wide range of players in the DeFi space. We have a wide range of players in the consumer space. Like way too many to talk about, even just one of those, like for the entire length of a podcast. And so like that's always super promising because again, like this is a community that was criticized for just literally not existing. Like people literally just said like, yeah, there's 70 devs or 75 devs, whatever the meme was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like this is obviously very contrary to that viewpoint on the medium term. And then also the hackathons as well. In this case, Hyperdrive, just looking at number one, like the number of candidates as well as like the quality of teams.
Yeah,
I thought was pretty good as well. And then on the long term, of course, everyone talks about Fire Dancer. There's also SIG, which I think is pretty important, and like Runtime V2 as well. And so you can get into any of those, but that's kind of my takeaway from Breakpoint is like looking pretty good on it on each time frame.
You mentioned the exchanges, and I think it's quite an interesting meta, if you like, that's happening right now, because you've got Coinbase, who obviously have started Base. There are now rumors maybe going around that Kraken are about to potentially build out an L2 on Ethereum. Yep. So it does feel that maybe there was this existential risk with the Solana ecosystem of not being linked to a major centralized exchange to help with onboarding. And of course, during Breakpoint, we've had Backpack have announced that they're going to be doing their exchange, which will be integrated within the Backpack wallet, and Cube as well are another centralized exchange. I think their light paper dropped today, and they're doing it's like 0.2 millisecond latency, which is, it's lower than Coinbase, lower than Binance. So it really feels like you've got these really strong candidates in the SEX arena who will be linked with Solana. How do you see that?
I mean, yeah, I totally agree that like you need one of these, you need a centralized exchange to kind of just like support the ecosystem from an on-off ramp perspective. Like most major ecosystems, be it Ethereum or like the Ethereum L2s more broadly, as well as like BNB chain, like that's, how, like if you were able to see like Binance's internal data, I'd be willing to bet that a lot of the inflows into BNB chain are directly from like Binance customers, because when you look at the UX of that exchange, or in Coinbase's case, like for Base, or before that, like for L2s, and then like way before that, like FTX, Solana, the UX can just be tailored in such a way that leads people towards one chain versus another. And so I think that's a super important facet. And like, obviously it'd be good to have chains that kind of leverage like what Solana has to offer today, like from a tech stack perspective. And so it's cool to see both like the Backpack team, the Cube team, trying that in their own unique ways. And I think it'll be pretty entertaining to see, who comes out on top, or if they both come out on top, maybe there's room for multiple players and stuff like that.
Right. They seem well positioned to being in Asia. That feels to me like a market that can just light, tokens on fire, which is retail interest. The rest of the US, until we get more clarity from the SEC, like you can't even trade Solana on Robinhood, for instance, or some of these random consumer apps. And so perhaps we'll see a lot of interest coming from those kind of markets. As far as what's exciting, I mean, what I've seen that's really interesting and unique to Solana is that developers they're not mercenaries in the sense that you can't really just go to another, like in EVM world, you can just go to another EVM chain. So like, one day you're a Polygon developer, Scroll is really cool. Okay, you just hop to Scroll, right? Like there's no switching cost for you. But these Solana developers, not only do they get so ingrained in chewing glass and writing these custom smart contracts and Rust or what have you, like where are they going to go? Like they just end up staying. They slog through the mud, so to speak, through the down markets. And the cliche thing to say is that it builds character, but really what it builds is an extremely robust and independent and meaningfully differentiated community of builders. And you see that firsthand at the hackathon. Like all these guys, they know each other. If you were sitting in the audience, when they did the announcements, like the energy is
Hmm.
pretty wild. And that's the thing you can't measure and you can't quantify. Like you can't go in DeFi Llama and quantify that. But when you feel that energy, and I felt it for 2 years now, or my third Breakpoint, every single one, it felt like that. Where these people are physically here, they flew out to this random country. They're spending their money, or the company's spending money. They're hacking away. They're building stuff that's pretty polished and impressive. And 900 something submissions this year. Like that's by far the most I think of any hackathon in crypto. That's really hard to fake. You can't fake that data, and you have to be. I don't know. I think you'd be an idiot to just assume all 900 of those won't become really valuable companies. I think 1% of them, 2%, 10%, they're going to do things in crypto. And so, from a statistical standpoint, it just makes no sense to bet against the Solana ecosystem. And such cool project, whether it's prediction markets for like social content, like social media content, like turning your computer into like a DePIN network to allow people to stream cloud gaming locally, like in your same city. That was a team I talked with. They won their DePIN track. Really cool use cases that they need the scalability of Solana. They need the UX. And it feels to me like, and we highlighted this earlier, the only kind of headwinds is like entities like Coinbase, like their reluctance to embrace Solana feels like the bigger headwind to get people on board into it that aren't already in crypto. So that's kind of how I view it. It's weird. There's like headwinds, a lot of tailwinds, but still some weird headwinds, at least for the US market at this time.
Yeah, I mean, there's always headwinds, right? And if there are no headwinds, then I don't know, Sol would flip Bitcoin or something like that, right? So it's like
Exactly.
And that's by no means is that advisory, because I certainly will not be betting on that. But yeah, man, I think there's always going to be these factors and these differences in perception, and different companies and different entities like will think about things differently. And like, I think Coinbase has done really great work in the vast majority of cases. But I just happen to like disagree on like their, at least from what I can tell, the stated opinion on like on Solana. I could be wrong. They could be wrong. Who knows? That's kind of the fun of the game, right? So I'm sure there's plenty of cases where, and like I've met a lot of people from Coinbase, and they all seem super sharp and all of that. And I'm sure they could pick out, if they go through my recent tweets, a few things they probably disagree with. So yeah, that's all part of the game, and I think communities just prove themselves or don't prove themselves in the long run. It's the old kind of, short term is a voting machine, long term is a weighing machine kind of dynamic. And
Yeah.
And maybe we're starting to see that play out to some extent with Solana even. But I don't think that's necessarily at the discreditation of these other ecosystems, even like Ethereum L2s or Cosmos, Celestia, etc.
Because of course they keep talking about their wallet, how they're trying to enable transactions at less than a second latency and less than a cent cost, which of course you can do on Solana today. And it does feel, if the market cap of Solana does increase, if it does manage to continue outperforming Ethereum during this next couple of years, it does feel like it's going to be increasingly difficult for them to just pretend that it doesn't exist. And pretend that isn't a better option than trying to utilize L2 layers, really.
Well, yeah, it's like it's as we were talking about. It's one of those price leads narrative thing, right? Where like, for a number of potential reasons, that narrative isn't necessarily there for them. But if as the scenario you talked about, the price is going up at a better rate than other things, then the narrative changes. And I think we've all witnessed that at micro level, and that plays out macro level too. You said a year ago that Lisa and Van Eck and these other people are going to be putting out, and Rune from MakerDAO is going to be saying, we like the SVM. people would have said that's insane. But like here we are today. And, to Sal's point, a lot of the tech roadmap kind of stuff has changed. And, Firedancer, they put out more news about how they can, accelerate even beyond 1 million TPS, go to 8 billion TPS, at least with respect to signature verification. And like, there's so many different little things, different little teams that might have updated things like for the future. But in a year's time frame, like not that much has really changed, right? But the opinion has changed massively. So it's the same dynamic that will continue to play out. That's how it's always been, with Solana, with crypto, with Ethereum, it was the same. So
we've come a long way from Jack Dorsey calling it Solano last summer. That was like kind of the down moment, man. Can't even spell it right. Calling it a single point of failure system, Web 5, whatever it was, that whole tirade he went on Twitter. It's weird, like this market, and I'm not the one, I've seen people kind of talk about this or articulate it a little bit better, but last cycle, the BTC maxis were just down on ETH, and ETH went through that whole kind of narrative arc. This cycle, the ETH maxis are down on Solana, and we're seeing it once again, that narrative arc play out where they were wrong, and it ends up being, an ecosystem worth watching. So I think it's clear, like all of us here love or are very supportive of Solana and the ecosystem. What about any hot takes or just things you think are a little overheated? Maybe we got to put the brakes on, or just think about more critically.
I think as my Twitter shows, there hasn't been much critical thinking lately.
Exactly. That's why we got to do it now.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I mean, I think a lot of people are excited about like token launches and potential increases in user activity, but I don't know if we've necessarily really put in the work to show that like that will be lasting in any material sense.
Right.
Where like we could acknowledge that, hey, like maybe TVL isn't this great metric, and hey, like these incentives can be skewed, where like it basically just leads to the turkey on Thanksgiving chart where like, oh, like everything is great and then incentives stop and then everything goes to zero and stuff like that. And like we've seen that happen many times, like within crypto. And so that to me is just still like a sign of potential like, short-term focus in terms of, hey, I was buying Sol NFTs and I was using Jupiter or whatever. So like now I think I'm gonna like basically just like get rich off these airdrops, make a quick flip, and then like be done with it. And so I guess like the impact of those on meaningful like adoption of these networks would be the thing that I'd call into question, just because like increase in active accounts, let's say, is not necessarily doesn't exactly map one-to-one to like increase in like people who've meaningfully used this to like drive some value, contrasted to something like maybe like a teleport, where like if they have users who are like taking rides, like that's using the chain for an actual use case beyond just like, hey, we have these tokens now, like I'm rich, when Lambo kind of thing.
For sure. So you're bullish kind of deep in space, it seems, at a thematic level.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even necessarily bearish on all of these DeFi teams that are like dropping these tokens, but just in terms of things that feel a bit overheated in terms of the level of excitement, like this is going to be a panacea that solves all of our problems relative to like what we know now about these different things. Like I think these things would be super good, super beneficial, especially when done well. But I feel like the narrative hype is like, oh, we're going to have all these coins, and then TVL will go up, and then we'll be better than Ethereum, and then we win. And it's like, all right, like the end goal that I have in mind for like crypto networks in general. Solana just happens to be the one that I feel like, at least today, has the best possibility of getting there, is like actually having a meaningful impact on like actual applications that people use for non-speculative reasons with regularity. And like I think any one of these verticals can supply that. Like, you know, people use financial things. I use Venmo and I have to pay 1% fee to withdraw my money instantly. And like there's a whole host of teams, a lot of them on Solana, that are like building things similar to that don't have those fees and use Solana for settlement. It's like that's real usage as compared to like those teams can drop tokens and that could be great. But just I feel like not enough in terms of your point on critical thinking. Maybe like to me, for what it's worth, I'm sure the teams themselves are doing the actual critical thinking, but the community is just kind of moonboy posting. You know, again, you can just look at my Twitter if you want to see some of that.
Basically,
yeah, I completely agree. I think Solana has a really good opportunity over the next couple of years to really help push crypto forward into providing useful applications for people. Because I think if you look at the previous bull markets, which were predominantly being led by Ethereum, the issue was that as soon as people came onto the network, as soon as you were building up those network effects, then the fees were going up. You were getting this like economies of scale, basically. The more people that join, the costs actually increase. Whereas in normal businesses, the more people that join, the more products you produce, the costs go down. It's sort of the opposite with blockchain. So I think with how performant Solana is, with its local fee markets, and all of these useful real world applications being built on it, I think there's a genuine chance to push the crypto ecosystem forward so that we don't have to spend the next bear market trying to justify our existence yet again.
And betting on hamster races, because we did that. Or at least I did.
I think one thing that was quite fun was in the opening chat from Toli, where he was talking, firstly, the dragon outfit, obviously, goes without saying, and then also his piece on Solana alignment. Just if it makes it faster, if it reduces latency, then you are Solana aligned. And I think that's great. I think Solana at this point in history has a very broad canvas of anyone can join, anyone can go in any direction. And it's sort of in opposition, I would suggest, to the Ethereum alignment, which feels far more rigid, far more you must toe the party line. And sort of coupled with that, Ethereum obviously has been struggling price-wise over the last couple of weeks. So how do you view the ETH ecosystem? Is it going through its own existential crisis at the moment?
I wouldn't go as far as to say that they're going through an existential crisis. I think that'd be a little too short-term oriented in terms of like, oh, like price was flat when other coin went up for like 2 weeks, like therefore like we're finished. You know, it's like I think the thing is up like 50,000% or whatever from inception. So I think they're doing fine. And like technical roadmap wise, I think they have a clear vision. It's like the big disconnect, at least for me personally, is on the timing to execute on that vision, and like how it compares to the timing for Solana to execute. Because like I don't think it's some foregone conclusion that, oh, Solana has to be the best design, it's over, like the game is finished, and the alignment thesis that Toli has put out is the be all end all, and you know what the Ethereum people have put out is like nonsense. I do agree that to a certain extent, Ethereum's alignment thesis, or what people have talked about, is certainly more of a explicitly like socio-political one than Solana's is. But at the end of the day, like they do have this vision for scaling through rollups and, you know, with like dank sharding, proto dank sharding, etc. And the advent of ZK rollups, and if you get more users on them, then that reverses like the diseconomies of scale you were talking about, and like all of these things that like could very well work. It's just a question of the timing and like how does that timing compare to like what Solana already has today. And so to answer your question, like I don't think by any means they're going through a existential crisis. They're just going through like a miniature one, you know, where you're like, oh, like right now we got to talk about something on Twitter. So like, let's talk about how like Sol ETH is up whatever percent in the last 2 weeks and how that means like we have to sound the alarms. But ultimately, when you look at like 2, 3, 4 year time frame or more, I think the question for them is like, how are we going to get to, assuming a Fire Dancer launches within, I think their target, at least like that they put out on YouTube or whatever, is like mid 2025. And if they deliver on what they have discussed, then that's looking at, you know, anywhere from 600K to a million TPS or maybe even more, you know, with the more recent developments. And so the question that I think they have to ask themselves in the Ethereum community, or people in Cosmos community have to ask themselves, or the AVAX community have to ask themselves, is for each one of their respective scaling solutions, number one, like, doesn't even matter to get to that level. Like, actually ask yourself if you think that it matters. I personally think it does, because when you look at some of the financial applications, you know, like the original Solana vision of the NASDAQ on chain, for example, like to facilitate that, like you need like at minimum, like high, you know, 600K plus kind of levels of TPS. But for whatever vision that those respective builders and those communities have for their chains, you have to ask, like, number one, like, can we compete with the scale that Solana has on their roadmap on a 2-year time frame? Like, yes or no? And like, does that matter? And the reason why I personally have gotten much more like bullish on the Solana ecosystem in general is because I didn't see any route for those other ecosystems to compete with that level of scale on that time frame, nor did it seem to be the biggest focus where like, yes, there are teams building that and so on, but they seem to be distracted by this philosophical element where, similar to the Bitcoin maxis, became distracted by their own, you know, philosophy of, oh, Ethereum is centralized because the founder isn't like a mysterious ghost that no one's ever met or whatever, you know, so therefore like it's unholy and all of the stuff, ended up missing out on huge opportunities, or they could have just made a few changes, changed the opcodes a little bit, supported, you know, like have like legitimate rollups on Bitcoin and have done the smart contract thing. Like, and they talked about this years upon years upon years ago. They could have just rugged Ethereum's whole vision. Instead, you know, here they are basically spinning their wheels today. And so that led to like a big lost opportunity where maybe the people focused on the technological side. In my head, like all of these ecosystems are part philosophy and part technology. Mm-hmm. And building conviction in things in crypto is like, you have to, on that gradient, decide like what matters most and like where's your lean gonna be? Are you 100% philosophy, like decentralization is all that matters and, you know, Bitcoin is the only solution? Or, you know, maybe you could say Solana is 100% technology focused. Whatever makes us faster and lower latency, like that is what we're going to do above all else. And I think both sides can crowd each other out when it's a mix, you know. Solana has a mix where, for example, the people who are very like open source ethos often get crowded out by the people who are like performance, you know, technological focus. where there's a lot of things that should be open source, but that just kind of got overlooked because we want to ship something and we got to just, upgrade the performance. And in Ethereum's case, you might have people who want to and have a vision for how Ethereum can scale to compete with Solana while addressing, the bridge risks and all these different things that we talk about, but they get crowded out by people who are, still having this same spinning wheels decentralization discussion because of a 1.5K or 2.5K difference in node count between Ethereum and Solana. So, well, I don't think it's reached crisis levels yet. In summary, there is definitely this strife aspect of like, some people just want to focus on building good tech in the way that they seem best in the Ethereum landscape, and I wish all those people the best. But they have to contend with this other group of people within that same ecosystem who, if they're not careful, will grow to such a bloat of size, similar to what we've seen in the Bitcoin landscape, where like nothing gets done, none of these improvements get made, and then you wake up one day and FireDancer's doing 1 mil TPS, and you're still stuck doing, the 15 TPS that most of the rollups do today.
So you brought up FireDancer kind of in that longer term vision. And I think it's a good segue actually to this next question, which is, and I think it's a good question for both of you guys actually, because I think both of you have done thinking on this, the SOL token itself, and the economics of the SOL token. Because I think a lot of people get super, I don't want to say hung up, but they focus heavily on like, can this thing actually be worth something in the future? Like, why should I buy it from a fundamentals perspective? And ETH has that meme of ultrasound money being deflationary. Perhaps Sol can hit that too, right? Like, what is this? Is there some combination of what's enabled by FireDancer in terms of increased throughput, what increased demand to use the chain would look like, and then on the fee side, because we could increase the fees potentially without really affecting the UX. And I think Anatoly's talked about this a few times before. Is there some combination here that you see in the future where if we get these parameters or these levers right, actually this token becomes net deflationary? Like, how do you think about that?
I think if ETH is ultrasound money, I'll offer my own meme for Sol, which is hypersound money.
Oh,
Nice.
I think that at least as far as the last calculations that I looked at, you basically need something on the order of 100 to 200x in transaction count at the same time as like a 2 to 4x in average fees to basically go from like 7-8% inflation, whatever we're at today, to basically net zero inflation. And so then anything beyond those levels on either side of transaction count or fees, assuming the same for everything else, would mean that like the SOL token would be deflationary. I think the jury's still out on whether or not that's like a desirable characteristic or just like a pump-a-mental meme.
Yeah.
But again, if we're offering memes, hypersound money, you heard it here first.
Nice. What's the emoji you're going to have everyone put in their bio?
I haven't gotten that far, man. Come on.
Oh, it's
You
important.
got to give me some time.
But I think so. There's other things. So, firstly, the inflation rate goes down to 1.5% from I think it's like 6.5%, but people receive more than that because not everyone stakes. So I think it's like 6.5% down to 1.5%. So obviously that hurdle to become deflationary gets easier and easier as each year goes by. But for me, the fundamental thing is that everyone believes Ethereum is this like incredible asset, deflationary, and it's going to go on ad infinitum. But I refuse to believe that the market will long-term sustain transaction fees to be to the order of 10,000x higher on Ethereum than they are on Solana. I refuse to believe that there are many businesses out there which would stomach such high cost increases just for using Ethereum, which, at the moment, maybe it's okay with more liquidity, more tokens, but I think over time, the gap is going to reduce about why you would want to launch on Ethereum. And so I think that the future of the space is going to be very high TPS, very low transaction fees. And then also I think MEV capture will form another part of it. And I think that both Ethereum and Solana will have to get used to that new meta. Again, I refuse to believe that Ethereum can maintain the sort of level of fees that it's been able to accrue in a virtual monopoly for the last 6-7 years or so. So yeah, that's how I see it, that both Solana and Ethereum are going to have to resolve this. And I think it's just going to be very, very high TPS and a couple of big winners. And then a lot of blockchains which sort of fade to obscurity.
Yeah, and I think, I guess to be fair to the Ethereans or whatever they call themselves, I suppose, they share that vision in terms of, hey, we're going to scale with these rollups or rollups of rollups. We've seen like Optimism, Superchain, and all of this stuff, where like in the end state, if you will, you do have chains that have like super high activity and low, like effectively zero fees. But there's just so much of it. When you bundle it all down, like the ETH L1 is still seeing a lot of activity, but from the user perspective, when they're at like the L2 or the L3 or perhaps even higher, they're experiencing the zero fees while having this kind of trickle down effect to the L1. So again, like I think that's a much more indirect way of accomplishing the same thing that like Solana already just accomplishes on the L1 by default.
Right.
But that would be their sort of counter argument.
But I think a lot of the revenue that Ethereum receive is activity still on the L1. And I just wonder what's the game plan there? Like, it's supposed to be everyone moves to the L2s, but we're not really seeing that yet. I think airdrop farming has accounted for a lot of that activity. But I think either they stay on the ETH L1, but they're just going to be exposed to increasingly high fees, or they move to the L2. At that point, I think then the revenue to ETH then drops substantially. But yeah, I mean, how do you see it going? Do you think that the ETH L1 will be used for, I don't know, whales trading? Or actually, I suppose my other question is, where will DeFi on Ethereum end up in the future? Because that's something I can't quite work out at the minute.
Well, I feel like you have to differentiate like the end state user of these networks versus like basically the people who are propping up these networks today, Solana included, like all the crypto networks, which is like degenerate gamblers mostly. Like we talked about DPIN earlier, like 0.01% of the total lifetime users of like Helium Mobile or Teleport or insert DeepIn network built on other chain, like have used those things today, assuming that they actually scale to the level that the people building them like want them to scale to. And so in the case of Ethereum, where we say like it will take a similar like huge multi-order of magnitude increase in the total activity just on these different execution layers, be it L2 or L3, for the economics to work out in terms of the token still being deflationary with all of the users being on different layers. But I think it would be like a false pattern match to say like the current users haven't left the L1. The current users are all just like people speculating on Pepe or Joe or ticker Bitcoin or like whatever the case may be, right? And so those people are a bit more fee inelastic in the sense where if I think I can 100x on this token, $10 fee, $40 fee, doesn't matter. Like, when I'm going to buy my Lambo or whatever the case may be. At least that's the mindset. Of course, it doesn't, as we all know, it doesn't work out like that all the time. But Yeah, I think the speculative users are fee inelastic, and maybe that's why for so long people didn't use Solana, because the lower fees didn't really mean anything. All they cared about was the liquidity, the prevalence of tokens, etc. And now that we're seeing that start to improve on Solana, or even just have the potential to improve with points programs and theorized tokens coming, or even announced tokens coming, now we start to see like, oh my god, all this inflow of interest, and all of a sudden Solana is the best thing since sliced bread and all of that. So I think that's what matters a lot more for the short term user and like the speculative users. And then in terms of in the long run, like how will it actually work when real businesses use it? It's going to have to be a thing where there's hundreds of thousands or millions of transactions being executed across n number of layer 2s or layer 3s, and then the fees that those all kick back down the stack will just have to be enough for like the Ethereum L1 to maintain its roughly deflationary status.
So we obviously covered a lot of topics. I think one that we haven't had a touch on yet that I want to, I guess, close out on is just like the stablecoin landscape as it pertains to Solana in particular. And I bring this up because I think I've seen you tweet about Tron a few times, and it's not just you. A lot of people kind of are kind of pushing back against them as any sort of a success case in crypto. I think proponents of Tron point to the fact that Tether has very high issuance on it. It's by far the number 2 chain with the most stablecoins issued on it. I think it's like $4 billion or something like that. Or no, it's a lot more. It's like in the double-digit billions. And then a lot of people in emerging markets send money on exchanges to each other using Tron or Tether on Tron. Whereas Solana, it's like there's not high issuance, but the user experience of payments is really good. There's dozens of startups, and we just had one last week talking about a Sphere and the APIs they're building to enable payments. And obviously, you brought up Visa, another example where we're using USDC as kind of the rails to settle payments. And so, like Tron, for instance, is kind of a case study on just how to get, I guess, legal arbitrage with entity structuring and integration with certain exchanges. It feels to me like Solana has never been good at that. Like it's never been good at just getting on centralized exchanges and markets or getting people to care about it there. Like even Coinbase, like they don't want to embrace Solana. I tried paying people in the USDC on Solana, and certain states don't even turn on that feature for Coinbase, and so it's very confusing. It's kind of hard to use. Tell me about how you think about stables, because I think a lot of the bull cases we all point to, Deepin, Teleport, like they're using stable coins on the back end to handle the payments for drivers to abstract away blockchain. And so it feels to me like this is actually really important that we got to get right for mass adoption and for a good UX. Solana currently is, I think, ranked. Let's see, DeFi Llama has them at 5. Yeah, 5 after Arbitrum. So it goes Ethereum at 65 billion, stablecoin market cap, Tron at 47 billion, then a huge gap, then BSC at 5 billion, Arbitrum at 1.8 billion, and Solana at 1.5 billion, and Polygon's right after at 1.17. So just tell us about what you think about stables in Solana, like how you see that playing out.
I think that there's a couple takeaways from the scene that you just described. Number one, there's no guarantee that the best tech wins, because you look at an example like Tron in terms of its adoption. If you go to any of these countries that like actually use crypto and like want to just like hold, basically just to hold cash or transact in cash or et cetera, what do they want? They want USDT on Tron. Like, there's no, to quote a wise man who once said, there is no second best, according to these people, right? And so I think that's a clear case of like, yeah, you can, hyper optimize your chain, hyper optimize hardware and like truly have have people rewrite like long-standing algorithms that no one has improved in 20 years and make them twice as fast or 8 times as fast or whatever, like Kevin Bowers does. There's no guarantee of success, right? It certainly improves the probability that people will say, all right, like I look at these competing standards and I choose this one because it's an order of magnitude better than the next one. But there's no guarantees. I would love to talk to the Tron BD guys or whoever like actually set up a lot of these partnerships in these places, because it's something that really flew pretty far under the radar, I feel like, for most like quote unquote crypto native kind of people, until all of a sudden it was just like they were everywhere.
Yep.
And so, yeah, like, and then on the other end, you talk about a lot of these payment teams and, be it Venmo-esque or Stripe-esque or NetNew entirely, like maybe like a TipLink or something like that. I think you have a lot of teams taking interesting approaches to leveraging the fact that you can, like, it's kind of shocking how expensive the whole like financial infrastructure around payments and sending cash from point A to point B is, even with simple stuff like Venmo, or like if I want to instant transfer to my bank, like I get rugged for, like whatever 1% of, whatever it is that I'm trying to send.
Yeah.
And like, in Solana, that could be 0%. And so I think all of this teams have a legitimate chance of success because of the old kind of adage that, for a startup to win, they have to be 10x better than like the incumbent. And like I think that is 10x better. Now it's just a question of maybe less so on the tech side and just on the UX side and on the kind of growth hacking side. Like, how do we get people onto this? How do we make this fluid enough where like it's only in the last maybe 6-12 months where you could like somewhat seamlessly integrate like bank account to wallet app to payment app or whatever, where that makes it like pretty competitive compared to a Venmo or like some of these cross-border kind of payments platforms and stuff like that, where it was always competitive on cost, but people are very UX sensitive is what I find. Especially like non-tech interested kind of like people who are purely utility oriented. Like for us, we like the tech, so we're willing to jump through these loops and traverse chew glass, if you will, so I can figure out how to bridge and do all this other stuff. But for the biggest percentage of users, both retail wise and even institutional wise, much more UX sensitive and want something that either maps closely to what they already have or is a lot smoother and a lot slicker than what they already have. And so I think we're only now kind of getting to the point where that's even feasible in terms of the combination of the on-ramps / off-ramps, ability to integrate like, banks and stuff like that. And then the transfer costs have been low. And so now you can get to a point you can sign in with like Google and stuff if you really want to, and a lot of these platforms. And so now you can kind of get to a point where at the application level, like you reach parity or exceed parity on like almost every level. And so then at the stablecoin level, like the inflows will come if you have some Venmo competitor that is like gets to hacks its way to 1 million daily active users and it's using USDC on the back end. You know what I mean? Whereas I think the historical inflows are mostly from like, again, like more speculative capital. That's just like harder to predict in terms of like, will this high net worth individual from Switzerland decide to like deploy 5% of their portfolio to Ethereum or to Solana. It's like, all right, who the fuck knows? You know what I mean? Yeah, I think Solana is well positioned in that sense to take advantage of stablecoin flows for legitimate use cases, and take some time to play out. But I think we're kind of at the beginning of that cycle, if you will.
Inflows incoming, it seems like, or hopefully, especially as these bridges get better too, which I'm noticing much better than even 6 months ago.
Yeah, I personally enjoy the bridging experience a lot more nowadays than I feel like there's some pretty quick options. Like I've used dBridge.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's pretty solid. I think I found them when I was over at Breakpoint, and yeah,
Super
a lot
slick.
quicker than the 30-minute black box of the past.
Yeah, wormhole, and then having to find liquidity for that final leg of the trade. I think retail will have a lot of more options to allocate into Sol, whether it's more exposure through sexes, like Backpack and things like that. Maybe these exchanges in the US will start embracing it if the SEC gets more clarity, then the bridging experience is getting better, and you can accept whatever token you want to come in on. It's all super exciting. I think we talked about a lot of obvious tailwinds covered, and hopefully demystified a bit of the mania around Solana. Talked about some important headwinds, though, to keep consideration of as we navigate this upcoming, I guess, bull market, it seems. Just crazy to think about. Kel, it's always fun catching up with you and getting your perspective on things. I'm sure we'll see you around on Twitter as well. But thank you for joining us again for the second take of this.
Thank you all as well. It's always a blast.
Awesome.